And it's an incredibly terrifying experience to make something very personal.
Why did we do it?
I don't. It's psychologically, it's a question for many people.
It's sick.
But you were saying kind of some insightful things about what it did to prepare you for putting out something so personal out into the world for people to watch it and have opinions about it. And ultimately, it involves a kind of release, no? So what was that experience like for you?
Well, we shot the film at the end of 2021, so it has been a minute. It's like sort of a complicated thing. You realize, it's about my mom. And then you make it in a vacuum with like in a very contained way. And especially like we shot in COVID. So it was like this very small little insular production. And then just with like the strikes and all of that and like the festival schedule of when we premiered, it really was like you forget that anyone's going to watch it. And then when we were leading up to it coming out, I really was like, wait, why did I make this again? Like you go like, I know why I wanted to initially, but now it feels very foolish to have made something. Why would anyone want to hear what I have to make? But I think when you do make something that comes from a personal place and comes from an authentic place and comes from like a real want to say something that you feel is missing, and we can get into that, like what I felt was missing maybe in terms of maybe a void this film fills, you are like, okay, I don't know, like the artist way just, I mean, like shout out Julia Cameron, but she goes like, you were given an idea for a reason.
It's like a spiritual guidebook for anyone that doesn't know what it is.
You do exercises, you journal, you do little exercises being like, why am I creative? What does it mean to me? And it really was like, it just reminds you like, yeah, you are the person to tell this story for a reason and you shouldn't question it. And you should just like be okay with the fact that it's happening at the right time. And I guess this was the right time, not only because it's when it happened, but also because Rachel Sennott became the most famous person on earth since we shot. So that was also very
great
lucky.
Casting, lucky casting.
Yeah, very fortunate, yeah.
What was missing?
Okay, so I felt what was missing in terms of stories around recovery and healing, in terms of PTSD and trauma, especially for like young women's narratives. Anything that fell outside very like patriarchal male narrative arcs of healing. Like I feel like so much of what we saw, especially coming out of the Me Too movement, was like your healing hinges on revenge or retribution or even justice, which is like a slightly gentler version of those storylines. That like when you win, then that's when recovery happens and that's the end of the story. And I just knew that wasn't true. And it didn't feel authentic to my personal experiences or the personal experiences of like the women I know and love. And I just was like, I think there's like a more nuanced conversation to have about how complicated and sort of cyclical and up and down recovery actually looks. So that was the one.
It.
Well, thank you.
You did it
we
beautifully.
tried.
I know that this movie took so long to make, and I know that it took a lot. And I am...
it took a lot of my hair.
It took a lot of your life. It took a lot of your hair.
Snapped off at the roots.
You know, you broke your ankle during the filming of it. Connecting the dots of how you got to this moment right now, were there some standout moments that looking back you want to talk about in terms of the process of making the movie?
Sure, yeah. So I started writing it in 2013. Again, it was like born out of a personal sort of want to explore these themes that are relevant to my life and my family. And so the standout moment, I think, was like when I realized what I was writing and that I wanted. Also, though, early on in writing the script, I decided to make the character a stand-up comedian because I really wanted to speak to the loss we experience societally and culturally, also interpersonally, but in a broader sense, culturally, when like young women's joy and humor is like stripped away from them when something like this happens. So I really was like, that's so important to me personally. Like, I've seen the humor drain out of so many people that I love. And we don't talk about that being like a major loss, like for us as humans. Um, and then so I remember being like, oh, but I think I need to do that visually. Like, I think she needs to be a stand-up in order to make that like a very clear representation of that sort of concept. So that was like a standout moment. And then the first time anyone said yes was in, because I tried to get the film made when, I mean, the script was bad in 2013, like it needed work, but I, you know, I was like working on a bunch of other stuff, starting my career over those years. And then in like 2017, 2018, our film's producer, James Wayman, he like read the script in Canada, in Toronto, and he was like, I think we could make this, like within the Canadian funding system, like, can I option this? And I was like, what? Yeah, sure. So that was another standout moment, just like the first person saying yes. And then we were supposed to be able to go in 2020, but then COVID happened. I made it all about me.
Of course.
It only affected my film. And then, but it was actually a blessing because I wouldn't have known about Rachel at that point if we had to go in 2020. So then I saw Shiva Baby. I had known of Rachel's stand-up. I had been a fan of her stand-up for many years, but I didn't know what a great actress she was until I saw Shiva in during the pandemic. And so another standout moment was we sent Rachel the script, and she like said yes within like 24 hours or something like that. Like, she read it and was just like, I get this. I know this. Like, I love this. And we had this Zoom where we were immediately like crying and laughing and talking about like depression snacks, and like, you know, the scene where she's like microwaving bologna, like we were like talking about our depression snacks. And so yeah, it was that. And then, I mean, you know, all the weird little moments on set that make something worth it when you're like, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think our premiere at South by was like really special. It was the first time I had ever seen anything that I had fully written and directed, like in front of an audience like that. And that was really, really terrifying.
Yeah.
And cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But terrifying and cool is the best place to live,
Yeah.
kind of.
And that's the artist's way.
Vibrate between terrifying and cool.
Yeah.
In writing a script,
Yes.
I feel like everyone has a different way in.
Yeah.
And I'm not making this about me, but for me,
Yeah.
ideas can come from songs. They can come from a dream. They can come from visualizing a conversation between two characters. And then suddenly you kind of pull that thread and an idea starts to not unravel, but kind of form.
Yeah.
The script is so beautifully written, by the way.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. I start crying. We can't continue.
It's
The
a
Q&A is over.
it's a really skillful, beautiful, special script.
Thank you.
What was there a moment? Was there what started the script? What was the beginning of that?
It was like the start of the script was really this idea of this relationship being really challenged between these two young women. Like this, I really, really wanted to speak to this archetype of like the cool older sister or like the cool older girl. Like growing up, I think we as young women all had that, like either she was like a camp counselor or a babysitter or like your cousin's friend from Jersey or like, you know, like just, or your like boyfriend's big sister. Like there was this young woman who felt like she was giving you this like secret knowledge to the world. And I had been on both sides of that relationship. And it was such a important relationship that helped me through so much turmoil as like a young woman. And I just remember being like, I wanted to like write. I just started like writing about this friendship between these two young women. And like what I realized with that archetype that I was writing to, so it came from there of like just like wanting to capture this really beautiful friendship, and then looking at how sad it is that trauma doesn't just like affect one person, obviously, like we know this, but like the lateral spread of it, like interpersonally, how many different relationships it can affect, but then also intergenerationally, how many like generations and relationships it can affect maternally. And but yeah, just like young women give each other the keys and little warnings and little roadmaps. And so yeah, trauma affects all of those trickle down sort of economics of girlhood, maybe is like an interesting way to say it. And so I just wanted to really challenge that relationship and that bond. So that's where it started, really, with those two. Yeah.
And then on a slightly more cosmetic level, when it comes to writing the script,
Yeah.
choosing stand-up comedy is I wouldn't do it because it means you have to write the stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
So how did you go about approaching, because it feels legit. I mean, I like stand-up, but I'm not around it a lot. It felt
Sure.
very legit to me.
Yeah.
I was laughing
Well,
at
I
the
think
jokes that
you
were...
enjoy it when it's really good.
Yeah. Yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that you have a lot of funny friends. You have a lot of
I
friends in
do.
comedy. Did you
Yeah.
turn to them to like authenticate that
I
experience, or
think-
how did you tackle the stand-up of it all?
Yeah. So, well, I like when I first moved to Toronto from Alberta, my first roommate was like an improviser and performed it at Comedy Bar. So, like where we shot was really where I came up. All of my friends were comedians. They were all stand-ups or improvisers or sketch comedians. I just like fell into that community when I first moved to Toronto, and I was at Comedy Bar like so many times a week.
I know, I gave you so much credit for that.
Well, yeah.
Honestly.
I was like, no, it can be fun. It can be
Yeah.
fun watching amateur improv.
I saw a couple shows there that were not fun.
I'm like, come with me, Dan.
Yeah.
But I really started like casting all of my stuff, whether it was like a dramatic short film or a music video or whatever that I was doing at the time in Toronto, from that community. And so these people were just like my friends and the people that I knew. And I've obviously worked with a lot of comedians in different capacities, whether as like co-writers, like we've obviously hired lots of stand-ups like in the writers' rooms we've done together, and like, or just through casting. But like Rachel is herself a very skilled stand-up. I
remember us having that conversation when you were
Yes.
looking.
Yeah. I was like, I think I need someone who like does it. And you were like, yeah, girl, you probably do.
You don't want to risk that.
Yeah. But yeah, I had seen her stand up like well before I knew of her as an actress. I knew of her as a stand up, and I loved her stand up. And it was so like bold, and the audacity of her, and like how she embraces her own sexuality and like uses it against people. Like she's so brilliant and smart, and I loved that. So when I wrote the stand up in the film, I always had written it as like, I'm not Aaron Sorkin. Like, I'm not like, you can't move a letter or a word. Like, I was like very much like, this needs to be a malleable placeholder. Stand up or not, anytime I'm casting anyone who's comedic in something, I really do like to embrace their specificity of voice. Like, I like to embrace their cadence and their intonation and like how they look at the world and how they speak. And so the stand up was no different. So thematically I wrote it. But I very much like, Rachel came in and we workshopped those sets that I had written for her, and she made them so much better, and she added buttons, and she like changed the wording of things to maybe make it like more relevant to her personally. And then she actually, while we were in prep, like doing like fittings and rehearsals in Toronto before we went to camera, she like went to Comedy Bar and she performed the sets of Sam's from the script to like test them out as actual like stand up, to make sure that they like worked in front of an audience. And as written originally, they didn't always work. Like, we did then take the things we learned from her taking that material up at Comedy Bar, and we tweaked it to be like what you actually see in the film. And then like, also I just was like, I cast really funny stand-up comedians, you know, like, so like Caleb and Sabrina, I literally was like, can you just donate some of your jokes that you're not going to put in anything and like say them on stage? And they were like, yes, of course. So I got very lucky in that regard too.
Well, I want to get into casting because it's such a special cast and it feels
Thank
so lived in a way that you rarely get to see. I feel like I feel like you gave Rachel such a gift and she gave you such a gift, and there was such a closeness between the two of you as you worked together through this, because your script, I feel, gave Rachel an opportunity to be seen in a light that she's not often seen in and perform outside of the boundaries that she's often sort of contained within.
Yeah.
And conversely, she was able to bring to life a central figure in your film that was so crucial to everything.
Yeah.
So I know we touched on it, but what was that process like? Was there anything else you want to share about working with her in those moments? Because you went through great comedy, but then you also had to be there for her through moments of extreme vulnerability. And
it was tough. Like, she did, like, the great gift of Rachel Sennott is that she makes everything look equally effortless. And like, I think what people get wrong about the comedic roles that she's been in is like, because she is so naturally funny, like obviously conversationally, you know this too, and like just in her own life, I think they go, well, like, oh, that's just her and she doesn't have to act, like she's just that funny. And it's like, it is true, she is that funny, but like she's doing something very technical. And so obviously I think in this film people will like recognize maybe the technicality of what she's doing because she has to be more dramatic, but she like makes it all look equally effortless. Like she's really prepared. She's really smart. She's like approaching it like a fighter pilot, you know, but then it really feels like you're just like sitting in a room with someone having a conversation when you're directing her. I think the thing that I like could bring to her was like, the safety to go to some of those places. Like, not that she hasn't had that before, but like, it was really like, we can go here. We trust each other understanding this in the same way. We trust like our personal connection to this, and like, we're here for each other. So I feel like it was about just like, like letting her know that I was never gonna let it be too melodramatic or too saccharine. Like, I think that would be the scary thing as an actor doing something like that. And I think she trusted my tone. And then something like the greatest gift that she gave me was, I think on the page, Sam read a little bit harsher, like had a harder edge to her. And then Rachel just is so fucking sweet. Like, you literally like are like, you look at her and you're like, I just want to like protect you, like you are an angel. And she is just like so earnest and so sweet, and that just like bursts forth from her, and she really put that in the character, and I think the character really needed that element, because
I think that's a like you know, like casting is such a confusing and oftentimes like very fearful experience, because until you find the person, you're like, you're fucked. You're fucked. You are completely screwed. And it's a panic because you're thinking, gosh, well, I've written something and in my head this person exists, but where are they?
But then also, like, what's so incredible is when an actor can come in and teach you something new about a character.
Well, that's the dream. Like, that's when the magic happens. Works.
And like that happened with Rachel, where I was like, oh, she's very like hyper feminine and like sweet, and I was like, I had pictured the character just a bit harsher, and then I was like, and then when I really think about who the character is and who she represents, I'm like, oh my God, how did I not see that before? Like, that's exactly who this person is. And so letting yourself be surprised by casting is, I think, the greatest gift you can give yourself, is like not being too stringent. And then the same thing happened with Olga, who plays Brooke, like, who's
incredible. We had spoken about when I love this about Ally told me what the concept of the movie was long before the movie was made. And she was like, it's a conversation. It's like it's a rumination on like generational differences and
Trauma.
and I sort of took in the story and really responded to it, but then sort of said, so then you need to find a child actor.
He goes, so it all hinges on sort of a good child actor.
So you're going to need to find a child actor. That is a terrifying prospect.
And I went, thank you for
And then you did.
And then we found Olga. And that was like that thing of like, okay, we had Sam, like we had Rachel, we had our Sam. And I was like, who though is going to match how like effervescent and effortless and specific and singular
and
Rachel
natural.
Sennott is. She's so natural. And like, and actually one of my producers, Jason, is in the audience right now. And he was there with me for the search. We had to cast Olga, or we had to cast Brooke as a Canadian because we shot in Canada and we had to have a majority Canadian cast. So we were limited to finding this character in Canada. We looked at every teen actress in Canada and we saw Olga's tape, and she said that line that she says in that final scene, because that was the scene she auditioned with in the motel room. And I remember we just like looked at each other and we were like, oh my God, we can make the movie. Like we found her, we can make the movie. But
Isn't it amazing?
She was so different than what we thought she would be. She
Right.
was not what I pictured she would be. She was also 18 feet taller than Rachel.
Right.
We were like, how are we going to sell?
I know, but it plays into the dynamic so nicely.
Yeah.
I think it's so great when you're putting something together and you know that there are certain tentpole elements that need to fall into place in order to ensure not necessarily greatness, but that you will have the the ingredients to make the thing.
Yes, to have a film at all.
And that was an incredible thing.
Oh, she was a major tentpole. And then they chemistry read together, Olga and Rachel, and it was just this beautiful thing of like Olga obviously like looking up to Rachel and like thinking she was so great, and like, and then but also like conversely like all of us being like, Olga is the coolest person we've ever met. And on set, like the whole time we were shooting the film, we were like, do you think Olga will think this is cool? Like, and Rachel felt that way too. Like she was like, God, fuck, Olga's so cool. And like in their chemistry read, you could feel that thing too of like, yeah. And Rachel was just like, she reminds me of my little sister. And it just felt very natural between them. So that was when we were like, okay, if everything else goes to shit, we can just film these two like on an iPhone in a motel room and it'll be fun.
That would have been very experimental and I would have been into it.
Thank you.
I have two more questions before we wrap up. The look of the film was so specific, like the way that lighting plays a part in the storytelling. For most of the movie, the lighting is quite violent in a way, and it feels quite specific. It feels like it's very considered the way that the film is lit and shot. So, was it?
No, it was an accident.
Like, what was the conversation with
Yeah.
your DP like, and how did it land in such a stylized way?
So our DP Nina is incredible. We had so many conversations. We obviously were talking about PTSD. I think like again in pop culture we see fight or flight depicted quite often, but we rarely see like the freeze trauma response depicted. And so we really wanted to make like the two distinct timelines in the film like subtly different. And so we did that in a few different ways where Sam's present is a bit frozen. So the frames themselves are like still, like there's not really movement to the camera. And when it is in the present, it's very like trepidatious and slow. And then also Sam is very like isolated in her frames. She's not in frames with other characters. She's like, her singles are not like dirtied by other characters. And she's not like really touched by light. Like in the present, she's very sort of cut off from like different colors don't really play on her. If they do, like you're saying, they feel very like violent and like they're drowning her. And then in the past there was like, she was very much in her world. So she was like in sharing frames with other characters. There was like a movement to the camera. There was like a handheld quality that added like like a life to when she was with Brooke and with her friends and with Noah. And then the same thing, there was like more color in the light, and it touched her, like it interacted with her, and it was like gentle with her. And so like all of these things, yes, were very purposeful, because we also did really have to, because we're not doing anything with like graphics being like, this is this year and this is this day and we're going to the past now and now we're going to the present. So we had to try and figure out like a visual language that could cue the audience to like, now we're post the bad thing or now we're pre the bad thing. Yeah.
That is a lot to take on in a 19-day shoot.
Yeah, it was really hard. Jason saw me crying in porta potties.
That is a lot to take on in a 19-day shoot. Yeah. My last question is, I know that you made this movie for your mom, so has she seen it?
She did see it. She only saw it like a month ago.
What was that experience like?
Oh, well, we don't talk a lot about it. And it screened for National Canadian Film Day. So it pre-screened before it came out in theaters in like smaller towns like across Canada where it wouldn't be like getting a wide release. And one of those towns was like where I grew up. And so I went back for the screening there, and she didn't know what to expect. I mean, I kind of gave her a bit of a heads up, and then we were all out in the lobby after, and I was like with a bunch of my like old friends and like my family and people, and it was very like bustling, and she just sort of like looked at me and was like, thank you, like really quiet, and I was like, oh no. So that was sort of all I needed. So, you know, any incel on Letterboxd that doesn't like it can't really hold a candle to that review.
Experience.
Yeah.
Well, I say thank you as well for making this beautiful film and
Thank
for
you,
talking
Dan.
to us all tonight.
I mean, thank you for doing
thank
this.
you.
This has
It's
been so lovely.
a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming and watching it.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.